The following podcast was recorded 2 days later than intended on July 31st, 2009, Harry Potter's birthday, and contains spoilers for Torchwood Children of Earth, which has now aired in the UK, Australia, and North America, and is currently available on Region 1 and 2 DVD. However, these spoilers do not occur until the second half of the podcast, and you will receive another warning. Even so, the first half of the podcast contains information about the trailers for upcoming Doctor Who specials, including casting information about returning characters, so consider yourself warned. That was a long spoiler warning, but my due diligence has been done, and so roll opening theme. The Cloister Room, starring Tom Dickinson. A podcast about Doctor Who and other science fiction and fantasy, and even some other things. Episode 002, Oh Captain, My Captain. Welcome to the Cloister Room. I'm Tom Dickinson, Two Eyes No E's, your host, and this week we're expanding our operation. That's right, I'm trying a longer format this week and incorporating multiple acts. Today's episode comes to you in 4 acts. In Act 1, I talk about the trailers from Comic-Con. In Act 2, I introduce a new segment in which I respond to another podcast. In Act 3, I introduce another new segment, and in Act 4, I give you the promised discussion of Captain Jack. And that's this week's show, so let's get it started with Act 1. Unless you live under a rock or some other place where you don't have internet access, you're probably aware that last week was San Diego Comic-Con 2009. As I mentioned in my last episode, there had been some speculation that a Doctor Who feature film would be announced at the Doctor Who panel on Sunday at the convention. No such thing ended up happening, which, in my opinion, is quite fortunate for the franchise, but some interesting revelations were made at the panel nonetheless. Most notably, trailers for the upcoming Doctor Who Gap Year specials. The trailer for The Waters of Mars, the special to be aired in November-ish, was shown at the con and then put on the BBC website, so you can view it there if you're in the UK. If not, you can find it on YouTube, and I'll post a link to it in the show notes. My overall impression of the trailer is one of optimism. It looks very tense and dark, very much the opposite of Planet of the Dead. While Planet of the Dead was a big romp across an open desert landscape, this looks like a more claustrophobic, intense drama on a set. A lot of great stuff has been made in the new series under these circumstances, most notably stories like The Impossible Planet or Midnight. But I can't help but wonder if they're confining themselves to a set this time just to keep it low budget, and balance out the expensive filming in Dubai for Planet of the Dead, and the special effects extravaganza that's no doubt going to come at the end of the year. Either way, it seems that contrary to what I had been assuming so far, this is going to be a story that's important to the overall Doctor Who mythos. For one thing, the trailer makes clear that "he will knock 4 times" refers at least in part to something that will occur in this story. In addition, it looks like a central theme will be one of changing history. This is something the program has talked about from time to time, starting back in the Aztecs with Barbara, and more recently in the Fires of Pompeii with Donna. But the rules of what can and cannot be changed have always been murky at best, so if this story is going to be discussing those rules, that's an exciting thing for me. As far as whether the Ice Warriors are involved in this story, it looks right now as though it could go either way. Even if they're not involved in the story, I think it's likely that we'll get at least a casual name drop by David Tennant. But perhaps more interesting than the trailer for Waters of Mars is the one shown for the 2-part Christmas special, which will be David Tennant's final story. The trailer gave the tagline, "The End of Time," although whether this is the title of one of the episodes is unclear. The trailer hasn't been made officially available online, so the only thing I've seen is the second-hand footage from the convention. And I can't make out everything, but there's still lots to digest. I'll put a link to the footage of the trailer in the show notes. If you don't want to be spoiled for the story at all, then now is your time to stop listening to this podcast. Alright, still listening? Good. It looks like this episode's going to include a lot of different characters. Now, maybe not quite as many as Journey's End, but, this is just the trailer, so we haven't exactly seen everything. It's been known for a while that the Doctor would be accompanied by Wilfred Mott, Donna's grandfather. And, of course, he's in the trailer. It's also been rumored, and now confirmed officially, that Timothy Dalton of James Bond is going to be in this story. However, since he does a voiceover, we obviously don't know what character he's going to be portraying. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if he was some kind of Time Lord. Although whether he's the meddling monk, or a member of the High Council, or Drax or something, that's anybody's guess. But there are a few more specific pieces of casting information that we can glean from this trailer. For instance, the Master is back, he's blonde, and he's still played by John Sim. The whole "he will knock 4 times" thing from Planet of the Dead seemed to imply the return of the Master. And while we don't really know if the knocking 4 times has anything to do with the Master, we do now know that the Master is in fact coming back. This excites me because I always liked John Sim's version of the Master. The John Sim Master was very much a counterpart to the David Tennant Doctor, and that's why it's kind of appropriate to have the Master return in the Doctor's final hour. Exactly how the John Sim version of the Master manages to turn up is, of course, open to speculation, and I have a couple of ideas about it, but I'm going to put those off for just a minute. To point out that it has also been confirmed by the BBC that not only is the Master returning, but also Lucy Saxon, the Master's wife, from Last of the Time Lords. Lucy was an interesting character in The Sound of Drums and Last of the Time Lords, who was very much in the background, but that didn't make her any less compelling. The fact that she said so little, and we knew so little about her, was one of the things that made her so interesting. So hopefully they have an interesting direction in mind for the character when they bring her back, rather than just some useless cameo, because that would be kind of cheap. It's also obvious from the trailer that Donna and Sylvia Noble will be returning to the program. I don't think this is a very big surprise to anybody. After all, Wilf is coming back, so it was kind of a given that they were going to be coming back. And I know that there are some people who like to grumble about them bringing back companions who have left the show for one reason or another. But I think there's still more they can do with the character of Donna. Sure, there's an insurmountable obstacle for Donna remembering the Doctor, but hey, the Doctor overcomes insurmountable obstacles on a daily basis. And the loss of Donna is the reason for his current companionless state. So if the Lonely Doctor thing is going to be brought to a close, then Donna would be the person to do it. So this special seems to contain a few nearly impossible returns of characters. But there is a line in the trailer that might account for that in some way. The Timothy Dalton voiceover refers to dreams as an important part of the storyline. And so it's possible that Donna, or even the Master, could be returning not in the flesh, but only as a dream. I admit it would be kind of lame if the Master only returned for a short dream sequence, but if dreams are going to play as major of a role as it seems like they are, then a Dream Master might be just as good as the real thing. Who knows? I think keeping the story in dreams might also give it a more intimate feeling and make it a lot smaller than some of the other Davies finales we've seen. Because Davies has a tendency to go bigger and bigger with each finale, and if he does that again here, then it might well collapse under its own weight. Some would say that happened with Journey's End, but I'm actually kind of a fan of Journey's End, which I guess is a topic for another podcast. In any case, I'm really looking forward to this finale for David Tennant. It's going to be very much the ending of one era and the beginning of another, and that's exactly the kind of change that Doctor Who is all about. Alright, that concludes my remarks on those trailers, so I hope you'll check them out, and this brings us to Act 2. Today in Act 2, I am introducing a new regular segment on this podcast called Counter Podcast, in which I respond to something that someone else has said in another podcast. This week I'm looking at the latest episode of the Minute Doctor Who podcast, which I will link to in the show notes. This act has minor spoilers for Torchwood Children of Earth, but nothing really major. In the latest Minute Doctor Who podcast, the host Luke talks about a scene in Children of Earth where we hear about how one woman, a devout Christian, was so distraught at the increasing amount of alien activity that she felt that her faith had been completely invalidated, and this led her to commit suicide. Luke got a bit offended at how Russell was portraying Christianity, but I don't think RTD was making a general statement about Christianity. Rather, he was telling a particular story about one woman's experience, and it has less to do with Christianity than with narrow-mindedness. While it's absolutely true that the existence of aliens would not be evidence against the resurrection or divinity of Christ, it is also true that the Judeo-Christian scriptures and tradition can be seen to imply that the human race, and by extension the planet Earth, has a special place in God's creation above all other creatures. After all, he sent his son to us, not the Ood, the Ice Warriors, or the Thals. Oh wow, I admit I've made myself curious about the potential for an Ood Jesus. But I digress. The special position of the human race was taken for granted throughout most of history because it was only recently that we realized that we must seriously consider the notion that life might exist on other planets. Once you realize this, you have to shift your perspective and realize that not only are you a single drop in a sea of humanity, but humanity is a single drop in a sea of intelligent life forms. This is a massive shift in perspective, and it could really have an effect on you, especially if you've gone your whole life without devoting any thought to the idea. And that effect could even be traumatic. A lot of people would be deeply disturbed by it, and some of them would interpret this disturbance in religious terms. Some Christians would count the presence of alien life as a threat to their position as God's children, and thus a threat to their religious convictions. I think the key is that this woman says, "It's like Science 1." This was clearly a woman who saw the world in terms of a black and white conflict, where everything that didn't fit into her established worldview was inherently a threat to it, rather than something she could incorporate into it. It wasn't really her religious convictions that were violated, but rather her narrow worldview. And even as a Christian, I think Luke will agree that around the world, millions of people use religion as a crutch for their narrow-minded views, even when those views are actually at odds with the tenets of their faith. Some of the more oppressive Islamic cultures in the world are evidence of this. I think it's not at all far-fetched to suppose that some Christians would react in an extreme way. But Russell isn't making a statement about all Christians. Keep in mind that this is the same man who wrote Gridlock, which is set 5 billion years in the future and still features an assortment of humans and aliens who have fallen on hard times, but still find solace in that old rugged cross. And that's Act 2. I'll be back with Acts 3 and 4 right after this. And now for a brief but terribly urgent interruption.
Look, whenever you see me in this part of the TARDIS pacing up and down like this, be a good chap and don't interrupt me, will you? Unless it's terribly urgent. It's not terribly urgent, is it?
I'm Barry Scott.
Ooh, that was a bit noisy. Hello, this is a promo for the Flashing Blade podcast. I'm Tony, and this is my plucky girl assistant, Jo.
Hello.
That was a bit breathy Kensington miss, wasn't it?
Hello.
Anyway, what do we do? What do we talk about?
Oh, we talk about stuff and things.
And things?
Yeah, in equal measures.
Stuff and things. Doctor Who, science fiction, all sorts of silly stuff like that, but mainly Doctor Who, because it's my obsession. I'm the ancient wise one, and Jo knows, well, bugger all really about it.
I'm the plucky one, apparently, allegedly.
Yes, she's very, very, very plucky. We get Jo's completely fresh views on all sorts of things to do with Doctor Who, and my ancient, ingrained, indefinable magic views. So that's the Flashing Blade podcast, available from www.flashingblade.org.uk, iTunes, Podcast Alley, blah, 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 blah. That's the end of this promo. Toodles!
Bye!
I highly urge you to give the Flashing Blade podcast a listen. Tony and Jo always do a great job, and if you're lucky, you might even hear the Space Goat song. Anyhow, we're back with Act 3, and Act 3 is a short one. It's just the beginning of a new segment that will be on each episode of the Cloister Room, and it is called The Dune Quote of the Week. There are problems in this universe for which there are no answers. Nothing. Nothing can be done. From Paul Muad'Dib in Dune Messiah. And folks, that there is not a quote that just describes unit dating controversy. There are also some pretty unsolvable problems in Torchwood Children of Earth. And in my opinion, there might be some unsolvable problems with the character of Captain Jack Harkness. And that is what the final act of our program today is about. I'm going to begin with a summary of Jack's life. Jack was born in the 51st century and lived on the Beauchene Peninsula, which was invaded by aliens at some point, resulting in the death of his father and the loss of his brother Gray. Of course, at this time he was not called Jack because that is not his original given name, but he's now used the name for centuries, so we might as well consider Jack his name. As a young adult, Jack joined the Time Agency, where he was partnered, pun intended, with John Hart. However, Jack quit the Time Agency after learning that they had erased 2 years from his memory. Jack then became a con man. When Jack arrived in World War II London, it was then that he assumed the identity of Captain Jack Harkness, a dead American who had served in the RAF. Then, of course, he met the Doctor. At this time, Jack was still highly motivated to seek revenge against the Time Agency, but this is never mentioned again. After this, he traveled with the Doctor for a short time and died in battle against the Dalek in the year 200,100 before being resurrected and turned into a fixed point by a rogue Deus Ex Machina. Jack used his own Deus Ex Machina to travel back in time to 1969, where he bummed around for a few decades before being recruited by Torchwood 3. While working for Torchwood 3, Jack had all manner of crazy misadventures, including his encounter with a 456 in the 60s. 456 in the 60s, 456 in the 60s, 456 in the 60s. Anyhow, by the time Jack recruited Gwen in 2007, he was a bitter, angsty, 150-year-old man. The events of Torchwood Series 1 and Doctor Who Series 3 made him slightly lighter again in tone, but Torchwood Series 2 dragged him down again when he re-encountered his brother Grey. Grey brought him back to the year 27 AD and buried him underground for 2 millennia. But Jack takes it pretty well. Realistically, Jack should have been more affected by that sort of constant death and rebirth for 2 straight millennia, but hey, that's not my point today, so I'm going to let it slide for the moment. Anyhow, after that, we have the events of Journey's End, and then finally Children of Earth, after which Jack is so traumatized that he has to abandon Earth. And then, of course, there's Jack's future, in which he may or may not become the face of Bo by the time of the year 200,000, and stay that way until at least the year 5 billion, before ultimately dying in gridlock. I realize that if you're listening to this podcast, which you are, you're probably already aware of all this information about Jack, but I thought it necessary to lay it all out in order to demonstrate exactly how disconnected all the different versions of Jack really are. Jack is a character that's been taken in a lot of different directions, and I think the problem with this is a lack of clear planning for the character. Jack has simply been used in whatever form was convenient for a given story, with little regard to telling a consistent arc about the character. The main focus of Jack at the beginning was that he was a lighthearted, fun, and flirtatious character who would shag anything, regardless of gender or species, but had a darker edge and a thirst for revenge. But Jack's mission has never been brought up again, and it seems to be entirely moot by now. It would be very strange to have a character who's now over 2,000 years old suddenly seeking answers about a paltry 2 years from his youth. Meanwhile, Jack has been bounced back and forth between light and dark extremes, with his return to Doctor Who and Utopia praised for bringing the character back to his lighthearted origin, and Children of Earth being praised for the darker, more textured view of Jack. And both versions of Jack are great in their respective contexts. The problem is that if you line them up, you realize that there's a lack of coherency to the character, and that seriously undercuts any attempt at either seriousness or humor. This is one of the reasons I'm so concerned about the future of Jack. I don't know whether he'll be showing up in the Christmas finale, but it seems within the realm of the possible. This current version of Jack is haunted by the death of his lover and his own murder of his grandson. That's the darkest Jack's ever been, and throwing that version of Jack into Doctor Who will drag the tone of Doctor Who into a place that's simply too dark for a family program. But even if they use a lighter version of Jack, that would be so completely jarring as to be unbelievable. Jack did something pretty horrible in Children of Earth, and I just don't know if I'm ready to root for him again as a hero. This is why I'd like to see Jack take a rest for a while, so that when he returns we can be ready for a fresh take on the character. But not too fresh. I'd really like to see something that builds upon what we've seen so far, not something that chucks it out the window. But I think we'll be seeing Jack again before too long, if not in Doctor Who, then in the next series of Torchwood, which looks increasingly likely. Ultimately, Jack is a sort of response to the Doctor. Not an anti-Doctor, not in the way that the Master or Davros or Valeyard is, but as a sort of alternative to the Doctor. That's how the character is first presented in The Empty Child, as an alternative to the Ninth Doctor in Rose's Eyes. And in Children of Earth, he's still an alternative Doctor, but in a very different way. This time, he's more of a perversion of the Doctor, doing things that the Doctor would never do. I just wish that they could take a more consistent route with the character, especially now that Russell T Davies, Euros Lyn, and John Barrowman have shown that Jack can be written in a truly compelling, original way. And that just about wraps up my 4th act out of 4. And that's it for the week. Thanks for listening to my ramble, and I also want to say a big thanks to those who showed up for the Planet of the Dead live blog. So next week on the show, I'm going to do, something Star Wars related. I'll step away from the Whoniverse for a bit, but don't worry, I'll return to it later. In the meantime, you can finally find me at thecloisterroom.com, and don't forget to double the R. Oh, please do send feedback to feedback@thecloisterroom.com, or send me an @reply on Twitter to the username, you guessed it, The Cloister Room. So until next week, or whenever the next episode goes out, this is Tom Dickinson, 2 Eyes, No E's, signing off. This has been The Cloister Room. It sounds the bell to toll your doom. I don't claim any copyright on Doctor Who, so please don't fight. I beg you not to sue me, please. I can't afford the legal fees. I'm just a college student poor. I've got $10, not much more. This poem has one single aim, to show you that I do disclaim unto the beeb with this short rhyme. But it's Lucasfilm's turn next time.